Hi everyone, hope you're all okay. Today I wanted to talk to you about the connection between your thyroid and the gut. So if you think about your thyroid, it's actually your master gland that regulates your metabolism. So it's not surprising, therefore, that when we talk about thyroid health, we always want to look at what's going on with the gut. We know that when our thyroid hormones are low and we've got an underactive thyroid hormone, that's going to have a direct correlation with how well our gut is performing. So today I just wanted to run through a couple of things that we'd be looking at when we're looking at what's actually going on with the gut. So one of the first things to look at really is how much stomach acid do you have? Do you have sufficient stomach acid for, for digesting your food, for absorbing nutrients, and especially for things like iron and B12, which are key nutrients that your thyroid need. And I think the big thing really is that when we look at stomach acid, it's about how healthy is the terrain in your gut. How healthy is your stomach? Is it allowing pathogens to come into the gut, like parasites or, bacteria to overgrow and become more prolific and therefore end up with a picture of dysbiosis, which can be really complicating and lead to lots of problems in thyroid health? Or is there sufficient stomach acid to manage all of that? And the other problem with low stomach acid is that it can actually have a direct impact on how your gallbladder is producing bile. So that lower stomach acid can actually mean that there is less stimulation going through to the gallbladder to release bile, which is then going to have an impact on how you're actually absorbing your fat nutrients, fat-soluble nutrients. And this is really important in thyroid health because things like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K are critical nutrients that we need to optimize our thyroid health. So when we don't have enough bile, that's going to be compromised, and that can then, lead to even, further decline in our thyroid health. And also our immune health, because those are key nutrients that's needed for immune function. So I think the other thing that's important to understand about your bile is that it's not just impacting your digestion, but it's also having a big direct correlation with your liver and how well your liver is detoxifying. So we can therefore see that low stomach acid and low bile production is not just impacting how well you're absorbing your nutrients and how that's supporting your thyroid function, but also how well things are being metabolized by your liver and detoxified. The other big thing I want to talk about is your imbalance in bacteria. So yesterday I very briefly touched on how important your beneficial bacteria is for converting the inactive form of thyroid hormone T4 to the active form T3. And when we have bacteria that's growing more than they need to be growing, and we end up with a profile of dysbiosis, what happens is that we're compromising our thyroid function because there's going to be less thyroid hormone being, made from an inactive form to an active form. The other problem as well is that we end up that these bacteria that are residing in the gut, they have their cell, the cell membrane contains something called lipopolysaccharides, and lipopolysaccharides actually can cause havoc for your thyroid. So not only can they impact what's going on with the communication between the pituitary and your thyroid, so it can actually mean that you end up with less thyroid stimulating hormone, but it can also mean that you end up with greater levels of reverse T3 because there's more stress in the body. And it can also mean that actually that there is that it can lead to increased levels of thyroid peroxidase, which is your autoimmune antibodies. And this is not really something we want, which is why when we look at the gut, it's essential that we make sure that there is a really good balance of bacteria in there. And this is quite hard to tell, because none of us really know what's going on in there. We're purely working off symptoms. But when I work with my clients with thyroid disorders or any other gut issues, it's really so helpful to do a comprehensive stool analysis test because you can get a really good understanding of what's going on in terms of the beneficial bacteria and whether there is an overgrowth of some kind. And then we know how best to target that, which is why stool testing forms a really critical part in supporting someone with thyroid, with a thyroid disease or suspected thyroid disorder. The other thing I want to talk about is poo. So constipation is a big thing when we talk about thyroid health. And a lot of women I've seen, since working in clinic, I have seen, 90% of the women I've seen have got constipation. It's a really common pattern for women to struggle to go to the toilet every day. And so when our thyroid isn't working properly, it's actually going to slow everything down in the body. It's going to make everything sluggish, and especially in terms of our digestion. So it's going to be impacting our motility of how long it takes for our food to turn into poo. And if we're not going, on average, that should be about 24 hours. And if we're going sort of a day or longer, that's going to cause problems for us in terms of inflammation and toxicity. But more importantly, it's going to cause problems in terms of estrogen. And this is important for women especially, but also for men, because they don't want excess estrogen in the body. So if you think about estrogen, the only way estrogen can actually leave your body is through poo. And so if you're not pooping, then you're not going to be getting your estrogen that shouldn't be in your body out. So it means that this unwanted estrogen is going to go back into your body, and this is going to cause havoc for you. Because actually, it can cause havoc for your hormones and for perimenopause and for menopause, and for even just if you're early on, it can cause problems with your cycle. But in terms of your thyroid health, what could happen is that this excess estrogen can actually block your thyroid receptors. And so that means that there's going to be less cells that has receptors available for active thyroid hormone, which is going to mean you feel even more tired. You feel even... you have more muscle pain and aches, you've got, higher levels of inflammation, you're not sleeping, you're struggling to lose weight, and all these typical thyroid, symptoms that we're seeing is presenting because you're not going to the toilet on a daily basis. Okay, so lastly, I just wanted to talk about leaky gut. So when we talk about thyroid disorders, 90% of people with hypothyroidism have Hashimoto. So that's the autoimmune variant on an underactive thyroid. And so when we talk about autoimmune conditions, we always associate a leaky gut with that. And the reason for that, it's not always present, but I think it's a major cause, for developing an autoimmune condition. And the reason for this, if you think about your gut as a mesh, like a tight mesh, when that mesh becomes damaged, it becomes more like a net. So the openings in that mesh will get bigger, and particles that should stay in the gut end up actually going into the blood. And this then causes the immune system to overreact. And this can then cause the immune system to attack things that it wouldn't normally attack. So the hypothesis on autoimmune disease is the fact that the immune system is overreacting and attacking itself. And this is where the correlation between leaky gut and autoimmunity lies. So when we talk about thyroid disorders, we always have to look and see what's going on. Does someone potentially have a leaky gut? And what do we need to sort that out? So triggers for leaky gut are things like gluten, dairy, food intolerances that you might have, chemical sensitivities, also things like histamine, infections, antibiotics, trauma, an injury. There are a lot, and even excessive exercise. So there are lots of potential causes that can trigger leaky gut, also known as intestinal permeability. So I think the key thing I want to get across today is that a lot of people might be on thyroid medication and they think that that's what they're supposed to be doing. And yes, rightly so, potentially for them, but they still might be feeling really bad. Or someone hasn't got medication and their thyroid levels are normal, but they don't really know what to do. Unless you go in to look at the gut and see how you can support what's potentially going wrong in the gut, you're not really going to get to a point where you're feeling any better. So it's really critical that you get to the bottom of your gut health and find out what's going on. And I really couldn't recommend a comprehensive stool assessment more, because it is the gold standard for getting somewhere with your health. So I know there's lots of other causes that can cause hypothyroidism. I've only touched on one component here, which is the gut. And maybe over the course of the next couple of days, I'll look at some of the other potential causes. But I hope you found it helpful. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope you all have a lovely day today. Bye for now.